In this video, I'm going to go over an interactable dialogue system that could be applied to non-playable characters, characters and other things that you can have a conversation with, as well as objects that perhaps you may want to uh, give information or descriptors or any other type of information to. And I'm going to demo the functions of what I mean. So in this scene, there are three objects that can be interactable. They are this wall, this capsule, and this sphere over here. The interactions depend on whether you enter the trigger of the object or not. So I expanded the trigger box, the collider of this wall, to protrude quite a bit. So if we get close to it, it's going to open up a dialog box that gives us something. It says this is a beautiful wall. Maybe I don't know. Maybe this is actually an example of an object that will have some type of clue or descriptor to it instead of actually being a conversation. One function that I added to the dialog system is that when the dialog box is open, your navigation is locked. So right now I am pressing WASD to try to move around, and I cannot. Even though I can move my camera, I cannot actually move my player. And you want to be able to do that. That way the conversation ends. So if I press enter, my dialog box will go away. And if I try to move now, my player movement is not locked anymore. So that's the function that I added. Here for the capsule, when we enter the trigger, we have a conversation with the capsule. And as we press enter, the lines scroll. And then when we finish our conversation, then the dialog box closes. Same thing with the sphere here. And that's the functionality that I would like to show you with this video. So first things first, you want to have objects that you can have interactions with. And I'm going to show you different ways on adding colliders and triggers to objects. So let's start off actually with the sphere right here. With this sphere, all I did was click is trigger so that it's selected. The sphere collider is an automatic component that comes with the sphere. So that's one way to use a trigger. Another way would be to, for example, have a capsule like so, and then create an empty game object, and that will group it with the object, and then add a box collider component to it, and then set it as a trigger. And then you can resize that the trigger box to whatever size you want. Now with the wall, the collider is protruding here. So instead of making an empty game object and attaching it to the object that with an empty game object that has a collider, what I did with the wall was add the component directly to it, box collider, and then I set it to is trigger. So those are the different ways that you can add colliders and triggers to 3D game objects. It's the same way with 2D, to be honest with you. It all depends on your preference because they will all work the exact same way. So once you add colliders that have trigger boxes on, what you want to do is to assign a tag to each item. And each item should have its own distinctive tag. Because the tags are going to be important. That's what we're going to use to call on the dialog box to open and close. So you just want to make sure that you do add a tag, that you call it whatever it is that you want to call it, and then you go back to the object and actually add it. So once you do that, the objects themselves are set. The next thing that we will want to do is to go to the canvas. So you should already have a canvas because our reticle is attached to the canvas. So prior um, to this video in class, we made a text importer that had a panel and text. You will want to delete those because we don't need them anymore. And what you will want is to add other things to the canvas. So with the canvas highlighted, you're going to right click, and I want you to add an image and two texts. So you're going to bring in a text 2 times. I created an empty game object to nest all those things under so that I could be organized. And I called this empty game object dialog manager. And then I attached the image and the two texts under it. The image I named dialog box. The anchoring on here, I had it stretched so that it conforms to the resolution of your computer screen. And I just changed the color, and I also changed the alpha. So the higher the alpha number, the more solid the fill is going to be. The lower the alpha, the more transparent it will be. So I like mine to be a little bit transparent. And then I didn't change any other settings within the dialog box image. Another thing that you can do if you don't want a solid color would be to bring in an image, a sprite that you can attach inside the source image, and then that would make the whole background of the text box something else. Now with the dialog text, make sure that you rename it dialog text, and this is the text that we're going to manipulate to change when we have conversations and look at things. So within the text box, you can leave it as is because this is going to change with the script. And I didn't change any other things within this object. The only thing that I did was change the color so that it's in contrast with the background and we can actually see it. An important thing to know about text is the positioning. So you want to make sure that it is where you want it to be and that it is not shortened. If your text box is short like so, what's going to happen is that your text is going to get cut off and you won't be able to read the entirety of the line. So you want to make sure that your text box is wide enough to fit the whole screen. And you want to give yourself some room at the bottom here because we're going to be adding some other stuff with the text box, the second text box that I asked you to create. So that's all for the dialog text. Now, the second text that you had created, you should call instruction text. And that's going to be feedback for your player so that they know what key to press or what button to press in order to proceed with the conversation or to close off the dialog box. So I put in enter to continue with mine. You could use another key. And also, if you choose, you can use a button instead of text, and you can also use an image instead of text. So it's all dependent on you and what you want for your game. But the functionality of a button I had covered already in 2D, so you would follow the same idea. And then for image, all you need to do is you would highlight the dialog manager and then UI image, and it will be like the same deal as the background of the text box where, let me highlight here, where you would drag whatever imported 2D image you want to use, you would drag it inside this box and then it would show in the background. So I'm just gonna really quickly give you an example of that. Oh no. So the only sprite that I have is the reticle. So that's the one that I'm just gonna use. So the dialog box here, if I drag in the reticle, that's gonna be the backgrounds. Okay? And save all those changes. So now we have the UI canvas system set up for dialogue. We have the objects that we can interact with to have a conversation with their colliders, triggers, and tags. So the next thing that we need to do is add functionality to our player so that when the player game object collides inside the trigger box of these objects that that it'll trigger the dialog box and that we can scroll through the text. So what you're going to do is go to your player and you're going to create an empty object and you're going to call it dialog zone. And all you're going to do with this game object for right now is add component box collider that is going to be a trigger. And then in your scripts folder, you're going to create a new C# script and you're going to call it dialog manager. And that's the script that it's going to be changing everything for our dialog. So once you create the C# script, just highlight your dialog zone and drag the dialog manager script to it so that it already has it. And now we can be ready to do the script stuff. A lot of it is going to seem very repetitive because it is the same function, dependent on the tags and dependent on what line we will be in this array of dialog lines.